These things are too bloody big. The Ram 1500 has been a big sales success in Australia, as has the Chevy Silverado, with the Ford F-150 and Toyota Tundra to join them soon. But are these US monster trucks just too big to operate practically or even safely here? Try parking one at Woolies. Welcome. I'm CarsGuide Deputy Editor James Cleary, and joining me on the CarsGuide Podcast panel to look at whether these full-size pickups are too much ute are key contributor Steve Corby,
Yo,
as well as fearless leader, editor Mel Flynn.
Thank you very much, James.
We'll also cover off this week in news and take a look at the fresh metal we've been driving in Cars in the Garage. So stay with us. So the catalyst for this podcast, Steve Otley has written an op-ed, and it's going to be published in parallel with this podcast. And he's posing the question. In fact, he's almost making a statement, that the Chevrolet Silverado has been successful. The Ram 1500 and others has been even more successful. They continue to attract new buyers. Ford has made a big announcement that the F-150 will come here. Even Toyota's getting on the train with the Tundra. What do you guys think? Are we structured? Are we able to accommodate vehicles of this stature?
no.
End of podcast. Well, that was great.
Podcast.
Thanks,
How
guys.
dare we argue with the great Stephen Otley?
Well, I've had the Ram, and I regretted every minute of it. I basically had to sleep in it because I just drove around my suburb looking for somewhere to park it, and then it ran out of fuel very quickly.
Wow.
I don't
It
know.
just
I
gets
don't know
better.
where people are parking them. If you buy one and you live anywhere in inner Sydney, that's just not going to work.
Well, I mean, put it this way. The Toyota HiLux, an already substantial vehicle, is 5.3 meters long. It's about 1.8 wide and 1.8 high. The Tundra will crush it. It's 5.9 meters long, 2 meters wide and 2 meters tall. Will it even fit into a typical garage? Mal, would that slide into the Mal Flynn garage?
Proud to say yes, it would.
Of course it would.
But I don't think that it wouldn't. I mean, look at any housing development these days. The garages are shrinking and generally barely big enough. Generally built around the size of something like a Toyota Corolla. And that's the thing. Like, if we presume that people are buying these as an alternative to a Toyota Corolla or something like a Mazda CX-5, or even a HiLux, no, they're too big. But, and look, some people do, and they're, unwise. And, Corby, I think spending every day as though you're looking for a spot in the shopping mall car park at peak Christmas period would be pretty exhausting. I'd get over that pretty quickly. But the thing is, if you head out to Central Australia or, beyond the city limits, there's plenty of people using these cars for their intended function.
Sure.
And if you're towing with one of these or carrying a big load, I'm all for it.
Well,
Because the more the bigger the vehicle you tow with, the easier it is to tow and therefore safer. And yes, your Hiluxes and D-Maxes and things like that are all rated at 3.5 tons these days. But if you tow with anywhere near that weight, it is not a pleasant experience. And really, you can't even actually tow with 3.5 tons because once you put passengers and luggage in it, it eats into that rating.
It's handy to have a vehicle that's bigger than what you're towing.
Yeah.
True.
Yep.
And
the
the
bigger,
tiny house phenomenon comes to four wheels. Yeah.
Yeah. So if you're towing a horse float, I'm all for it. If you
is that a better way to look at it? Are they better as a narrowly focused kind of specialised vehicle, heavy duty highway towing, off-road work? Is that a more sensible way to approach it? Because most of them will tow, 4.5 tons.
Yeah, and add to that caravans, and
Exactly.
Our thirst, Australia's thirst for caravans and big boats seems to be pretty strong. And once again, if you go out to Central Australia, you see massive gooseneck caravans left, right, and centre.
Yeah, not so many boats. Yes, but lots
less
of
boats.
Yeah,
but people, tend to want to take their house with them, and you can't do that with a regular ute.
Steve Otley, in his story, made the point that he does have relatives in America, and he says, they're in states where these vehicles are particularly popular. It's deep in truck territory. I think they're banjo aficionados and they like the bib and brace dungarees, maybe. And he's made the
just
point.
Like Steve.
It makes the point that, in the Midwest, the lanes are actually wider, and the infrastructure for things like a shopping centre is different. We tend to stack up into multi-level car parks. There, it's either an enormous footprint of just parking outside or single level. It's kind of built around these vehicles because for so long, the F-150, I'm not sure whether it is currently, but it was the best-selling vehicle in America and by some measures, the world.
It was briefly the biggest selling vehicle in the world. I remember driving one around America and thinking that assuming I would hate it, but because everything there was set up for it, I really liked it. And then I would go to a place to get valet parking. Someone would come up to me and go, "Nice truck."
Yeah.
I'm like, "You like this?" And they're like, "Oh, I love it. It's fantastic." And people always ask me when I drive them here, and they go, "Well, how does this work in America?" You cannot imagine how big the parking spaces are.
Yes.
Like you get two Corollas in there side by side. They're But here, that just doesn't work. I was at McDonald's last night, and you can barely fit in like a normal size SUV in the car space, and you're not getting it through drive-through. You would take the whole restaurant down.
You would. That's it. So you're going to have to pick and choose your trips. Where you can actually use this vehicle. You'll be guessing against yourself as to whether you can do that kind of stuff.
And then, there's a clear trend where tradies love to tow their trailers through the drive-through as well. Add that into the mix.
Yes. I've got to tell you, I used to work in a drive-through bottle-o. And I remember being at the register as this person drove through. They forgot that they had a cage on the back of their ute full of tires and completely smashed the ute. It was the cage was at like a 45-degree angle as they came in, and he just stopped at my eye level, and we looked at each other. And I've never seen anyone, young guy. I think he was going to face some consequences, but. Anyway, I mean, the point here is that the Ram is the prototype for the others in that, Ram Trucks Australia took the deep breath and decided to do the local remanufacturing, re-engineering. And they've just had their best sales month ever in August, over 500 registrations. Year to date, they're approaching 4,000. So the end of August, 4,000 of them. That's 38% up on the same period in 2021. And now, yes, there are some vagaries about supply, but this is a pretty orderly business. They're having trucks come in, be re-engineered for Australia, and it's made everybody else sit up and take notice. GM Special Vehicles has got the Silverado. I think they've done, let me see, I've got that number, 1,400 so far this year. And Toyota and Ford have said, well, we want a piece of it. So it's going to happen, and there are going to be a lot more of it.
And credit to the Walkinshaw Group, because they're effectively the ones facilitating 3 out of those 4.
Absolutely.
And I'm not sure if we actually know the F-150 converter yet, or remanufacturer yet, but credit.
Yeah.
Just a brief rant. It does make me feel old because all of this is about the Coca-Colanization of our country. When I was young, we used to laugh at Americans for driving pickup trucks. No one here drove a pickup truck, let alone we have utes, right?
Yes.
And now we've not only embraced the Ranger, but we're going big. And that's the other thing you used to laugh about. Oh, sure, that's a reasonable size truck. No one needs something that big. Suddenly we do.
Yes. Yes.
Very strange.
And how big is the Ranger compared to what it used to be too?
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting, you talk about, times past. Steve Otley makes the point that in the 90s, you'll recall Holden sold the Chevy Suburban with Holden badges. And most of them ended up being outside broadcast vans for television companies rather than, regular family transport because they just didn't work as that.
Yeah. From memory at the time, the intent was to take on Land Cruiser, and it had lots of numbers to push Land Cruiser, but, lacked the lots of the Toyota things like dealer support. And although there were plenty of Holden dealers. Anyway.
But the advantage is the ultimate expression of like a tradie, like rich tradies supposedly can't buy a Porsche or something, right? But they can turn up. They used to turn up in a HSV. Yes. That was cool. Now it's like my truck's bigger than yours, and pricier than yours. So this is the ultimate expression of tradie wealth.
Whereas a Merc X Class was a bridge too far.
Briefly, yes. I never understood the badge disconnect there, but anyway, neither did the Australian public apparently.
There was proximity to a Nissan Navara was one thing, but also a tradie turning up in a Merc is not a good look. How much am I paying you?
Yeah, it's odd, but a big American truck. I mean, we've always loved the Chevrolet. We put Chevrolet badges on our Holdens.
Yes. Now, look, it's interesting because Plane, Trains and Dogs and Cars, our regular correspondent, has made the point. If you drop down in Google Street View on any USA suburban area, their trucks are all parked in their driveways. Every friggin' house has a truck. So that's fair enough. I haven't done that. It'd be an interesting exercise.
That's a big audit, by the way. Google Street View across the states. But fascinating to know.
Might take a while, but it's true. So, I mean, we've mentioned it offhand, but Ford has made the decision to go right-hand drive, and that's going to be in 2023, we believe. And Toyota's undertaken an engineering study, but as soon as they've made anything public, you can bet your bottom dollar they'll be doing it to bring the Tundra here as well, and that would be by 2024. So the landscape is going to change sooner rather than later. We're not talking wholesale change, but significant enough that these are going to be getting around in the suburbs. And Mal, the building that we work in Sydney, it was built, I want to say, at a rough guess, in the late 60s, maybe into the 70s. And the parking spaces in here are ludicrously small. It was like they were trying to future-proof the building by making the spaces very small. The Valiants, Falcons, and Holden Kingswoods that would have been coming in here, I don't know how they did it, but these trucks would stand no chance whatsoever.
No, we can't even fit HiLux in there. But yes.
You're not getting into my local shopping centre either. There's no way. You might make it into the height thing, but the turns, and then you've got your concrete curves on all sides. You're going to be mounting that. They're just we're just not. And how do you redesign a whole world from this point? It seems insane.
And it's not even that. There are some just suburban tighter turns that are going to be 3-point turns for these things. I just don't know whether you'll be able to make it in one arc. But anyway, all right. No. Look, I think we've made the point fairly clearly that we think they are too big. It doesn't stop me badly wanting to drive one. I don't want to own a Tundra, but I so badly want to drive one.
But if you want to drive, go and drive it in America. That's what I would say, where it makes sense. Yeah, it's like a K car. I like the idea of a K car and the tiny little Japanese thing, but I prefer to drive it in Tokyo.
That's a really good point. That's not a bad analogy.
Not down the Hume Highway.
Not down the Hume Highway.
A K car down the Hume, or I think K car racing would be fantastic. You could actually do that on a go-kart track. That would be. All right. Well, let's leave it there. We've had commentary from Planes, Trains, and Dogs and Cars. Thank you very much for that. But we'll move on to the news desk and this week in news. Okay, so these are some of the highly clicked stories that we've got up on the site at the moment. Steve, could you just give us a précis of one? It's not a million miles away from what we've just been talking about.
Yeah, speaking of hugely popular pickup trucks we can't get enough of, the bigger, better HiLux is coming. The Rogue will hit showrooms in October. And the exciting thing about it is that it's not going to go up. They seem to be price matching on the old one. So it's going to be about $70,000 and $70,200 to be exact. So it's a pretty good deal. And you get a lot of upgraded suspension, better brakes, more aggressive look. It's about as guaranteed a seller as bringing the F-150 here.
Disc brakes on the rear.
That's it. Instead of drums, mind you. Ventilated discs, I believe.
It's a lot better brakes. I should have said a lot better brakes.
Yes, and for people that don't understand drums, there's this circular encasement and shoes move out towards the edge rather than, anyway, you know what I mean. They're fairly rare, except on commercial vehicles at this stage. So for all the details on that, absolutely, head to the site. Thank you, Steve. Mal, Nissan Patrol has been making hay while the sun's been shining. Land Cruiser was in transition. Now we're talking about the next iteration of that one.
Yeah, so Andrew Chesterton's done a story not only talking about the next generation Patrol, which is pretty exciting, but also the role that Australia is playing in its development. And so the two big things that Nissan Australia is pushing for, because Australia wants them, is more rugged. They cannot compromise its existing capability. And, all the towing and all that stuff. And, we get a big say because we're buying lots of them and we represent a big chunk of the Patrol's global audience. And we're, I think, one of the very few nations that buy it in right-hand drive too.
Yes. Okay. And I mean, Patrol's other big market is Middle East. So an important model for all kinds of reasons, but it's been a rebirth, almost a resurgence in Patrol recently.
Yeah. And, Nissan's been pretty quiet over the last pretty much decade. And if you check out this story, there's a lot of little details in there that make you pretty excited about what's to come for Patrol.
Fabulous. Very good. All right. And I'll give you the top line on a story that our own Richard Berry unearthed, that the next generation Triton ute could go full electric, and it's set for Australia. And now that's not exclusively electric. He cornered the segment chief vehicle engineer for Outlander and Outlander PHEV, Kentaro, believe this or not, Kentaro Honda. And they said, this person said, we have a choice of hybrid or battery electric vehicle, even for such a truck type. So they could choose a plug-in hybrid system. The local boss, Sean Westacott, said, look, we've still got a lot of dirty power that's being produced. Our infrastructure, is it up to it? Whether it happens, all the detail is there. So if you're interested in Triton and its future, that is all laid out for you in our news section. So have a click of that. And we will now move directly on to some metal that we have been driving lately, Cars in the Garage. Right. So, as I say, these are the vehicles that we have been steering lately. Mel, you're well familiar with this one. It's a Volkswagen. Fill us in, please.
Sure thing. So I've been testing the Volkswagen Tiguan Allspace in a long-term capacity. The one I have is the 147 TDI Elegance. So it's the diesel, but also the Elegance, meaning basically the top of the range without going for the flashy R-line bits.
Also meaning that it is elegant?
Well, you'll have to read the full story.
In the eye of the beholder.
So, it's... anyway, so it's not as flashy as an R-Line. So if you're after all the practicality and capability without the fragility of low-hanging body bits and massive wheels and things like that, it's kind of a smart package. And the diesel for ultimate fuel consumption, which is an interesting story. You'll have to read the full story to find out more on that. But also for my family, the big thing is not the big thing, small thing. It's much smaller than other things I've put my three kids in the back of lately.
Yeah.
And it still swallows 3 child seats, and it's relatively meager in overall dimensions. So it's quite an achievement, and still fits a lot in the boot. However, we can fit all the kids' bikes, but no longer can fit Dad's bike in the boot, which is some ask. But it's pretty good for
yours is a penny farthing, which is a challenge most of the time.
But look, I'm shooting myself in the foot by choice of bicycle, yeah.
Do you have any skin left on your knuckles, like after doing all of these child seat moves?
Yeah.
I don't miss that.
Mel, correct me if I'm wrong, you may have mentioned it, but are all versions of the Allspace 3-row?
No. There is the Tiguan Allspace Adventure,
yes,
which is a new variant. We've received, I think, 1,000 units as a bit of a trial thing. It's 5 seats. It's got a gigantic boot because you remove the seats folded into the floor.
Okay.
But it's petrol, 162 TSI. We'll be driving that shortly. Very interesting package.
But Allspace the one you're Adventure. Living with is a 7-seat car?
Yep.
And
Elegance.
You've exclusively been strapping your child seats into the middle row? Or at any... Yeah, okay. All right. So from what you've seen, would it be tight for kids in the back, or is that third row reasonable?
To be honest, I haven't followed it up yet.
Okay.
But in my experience, it's one of the classic smaller 7-seaters.
Yeah.
Therefore, really for occasional use only. But impressively, there's proper airbags back there, unlike many other 7-seat SUVs.
Righto. Okay, that's good. And thank you very much for that, Mel. And just to keep us grounded, Steve, you're with another, day-to-day proposition for families who need the practicality of an SUV. Fill us in on what you've been steering.
As usual, I'm in something small and humble and cheap, a Bentley Bentayga S, which caused some excitement amongst my neighbours, like writing me, texting me, going, "Oh, you've got a Bentley, you've got a Bentley." And I said, no, I think you'll find it's a Bentayga. They're excited about the badge. I can't get excited about the SUV. And I drive around going, it smells nice and all that kind of thing, and it makes a lot of noise. But how much could it possibly be? And I was somewhat shocked to find out that the price starts at $450,000. And I was more shocked to find out that mine came with $100,000 worth of options, including $8,000 for paint protection,
Wow.
Protection.
Which sounds like the sort of thing that the guy scams you on at the dealer. But,
is that paint protection multiple security guards protecting the paint, 24 hours a day?
But that's only my least favorite thing. There's also contrast stitching for $7,500. That was another favorite.
How broad is the contrast?
Wow.
Well, they're just stitches. They're just different colored stitches. Oh, but my favorite was you get standard brakes for $3,353. So they're the brakes you think you would get thrown in with the $450,000, but no.
Out of box, there's just no brakes at all.
The calipers are painted red, so that's probably $3,000.
It sounds like of a certain standard.
Yeah, but it's definitely a car.
And that plays into my theory that I reckon you reach a tipping point where if the options aren't poisonously expensive, that's a bad thing, because you've spent a lot of money on your car, and you want to impress friends and family with, see that paint? You know how much that costs?
Yeah.
Blah, 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 blah. How about that paint? How about that cross stitching there? That cost me $5,000. Wow. That's a big deal.
But if you told me that, James, I'd slap you.
Yes.
Why did you?
Often it doesn't even take that. You're prone to lashing out.
Particularly about things like this. Yes.
Okay. Now, so question without notice. What is under the bonnet?
It is a giant twin turbocharged V8. It's very, very powerful. It's got like 400 plus kilowatts or something. It's incredibly smooth and refined most of the time. 404 kilowatts it is, in fact. 4-liter twin turbo V8. And most of the time it's just quiet and a bit dull, but it's like a twin stage rocket. So you put your foot down, it does accelerate. And then all of a sudden, if you put it down a bit further, it just explodes. And it seems to have this kind of confused personality where even the car itself is surprised at how fast it is. So when you put your foot down, the nose leaps into the air, like what the happened there? So it's a bit strange. I think that the S is probably even more overpowered than the basic one, but 4.5 seconds to 100 for something that weighs 800 tons is pretty impressive.
And I think rather than the boat or the caravan, you're going to see the horse float behind that one. Polo ponies, I would have thought, yes.
And it's much quicker again when that same engine's in an Audi RS6 for about half the price.
Well, it's not too far distant from an SQ7, which is about a third of the price.
Yes.
Well, closely related when you think about it.
What is skin, yeah.
It's Touareg, it's Q7, it's Bentayga, it's
Urus?
Cayenne, and Urus. There are 5 VW Group products on that same platform. So, and I mean the ignominy of having, what is it that we had, Mel? Was it a Bentayga where the tow bar was branded Audi? Or I think it was, and various other bits and pieces wore the 4 rings. It's like, what?
You don't want to see that.
I don't know whether I'd be happy with that if I'd shelled out that kind of dough.
What I did respect, though, the key, when you get the Lambo, the key is actually an Audi key quite clearly, whereas the Bentley key actually had a bit of shape and weight to it. So I like that. But mind you, the key was, I think, a $50,000 option.
Yes, that's right. Because you need that for the definitive plonk onto the restaurant table to make that kind of statement. All right. Now, and now also, Mushandi says they should have the lot option, like a kebab, so that you can actually just fold everything into.
It's definitely extra cheesy.
All right, I'll round us out in the garage, and I have been driving. Thank you, Steve. I have been driving a Skoda Fabia Monte Carlo. So it's almost $37,000 before you put it on the road. 1.5 litre petrol, turbo petrol, 110 kilowatts, 250 Newton meters. It's front wheel drive, 7-speed dual clutch transmission auto. And on the plus side of the ledger, I had that it's comfy. It really rides nicely. I bookended it with, I've just gone into an HRV, and I've got to say that the HRV doesn't feel anywhere near as refined and composed as this Fabia did. And what else? It steers very nicely, a really nice connection between the steering wheel and what the front tyres are doing. Has a 7-year warranty now. As of this week, Skoda has moved to a 7-year warranty, so that's a big plus. 4.9 litres per 100 Ks isn't too bad for a car in this category for, claimed or official fuel consumption. And it has these very cool front door handles that sort of protrude from the armrest in an unusual way and actually are hugely practical. You just grab them and can shut and open the door super easily. Sounds like a little thing, but it made a big difference. On the minus side, I'm not in love with the front seats. I think there's something about the way they're padded. You tend to be cushioned a little too much without the benefit of the lateral location. And in terms of the engine, drive, normal D mode is a bit drab, and S is almost too aggressive. It's suffering that syndrome that a lot of VW Group products used to experience, where the drive setting was too conservative, hunting for higher ratios the whole time to improve fuel economy. And then the sports setting was too aggressive, and it was constantly changing down and keeping you in gears longer than you wanted it to. Well, this one suffers from that syndrome. It's like a throwback, which I found interesting. And even when it does get going, it doesn't feel like 250 Newton meters. It's okay. It gets along. It's holds its own in traffic, but it didn't feel like 250, and it's a bit squeezy in the back seat. So yeah, okay, it's a hatch of a certain size, but it is quite tight in the back seat. So to sum it up, I think it's a little bit pricey for what it is. It is fairly well equipped, but it's the same price as a Golf 110 TSI Life. So for comparison, I'm just a little bit confused by Skoda these days as to what their positioning is, who the target market is, because they're becoming almost parallel to Volkswagen and other brands in the VW Group. And I know that's a conscious decision. They don't want to be the cheap and cheerful alternative. They want to be the quality thinking, engineering-led brand. But
fair bit of pizzazz about the spec.
I found that car just a little bit confusing.
Yeah. I feel like they were aiming for Alfa Romeo territory in that,
really?
Look at the variety of interior fabrics on the inside and the application of color.
Yeah.
And also in the body.
Well, that's fair. It did have the Alfa style stripes down the center of the seats and what have you. That's a very good point.
No, you have to pay extra for those, James.
Well, not Bentley extra. It might be some, more reasonable extra. Yeah.
You can buy this whole car for the cost of that Bentley key.
That's true.
That is the boast. That's where you're talking about the expensive options are right once you get over a certain price point. This key costs more than your car, if you're inclined to that kind of behavior.
The net $100,000 figure Corby said, that's a Touareg, in addition to your Bentayga. So you got two of the same car.
True.
To a degree.
All right. Well, look, with that, we've reached the finish line. So it's time to say thanks to all our listeners and viewers. And thank you, Mal.
Pleasure.
And thank you, Steve.
Thank you.
And well done to our production guru, Mr. Brett Sullivan. He's made his rules of engagement for conversation clear, because today he's wearing a T-shirt emblazoned with the words, "If you want me to listen to you, talk about Tiranas." Jump into the conversation. Cars Guide is on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and LinkedIn, or traditionalists can email us at comments@carsguide.com.au. Listeners, please take a moment to rate and review the show. 5 stars is the preferred number. And thanks to Ross McFadden for alerting us to a bit of a hiccup with Apple Podcasts, which we are working on and will rectify quickly. Thank you very much, Ross. He emailed us. And viewers, if you're watching on YouTube, make sure to subscribe to the Cars Guide channel so you can stay on top of all our latest content. But before we go, I dreamed I was driving a Ferrari SF90 last night. 10 tenths around the Nürburgring. Yeah, I was fast asleep.
Boyo.
Language, Mal.